Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome from Rai, Amsterdam. Welcome to the session, Open Source as a Foundation to Interoperability. Welcome behind your screens, wherever you are, in your living room, your bedroom, your bathroom. We're going to discuss an important and ambitious issue. We heard in the many sessions before about opening the drone service market, the safety and exchange of information between so many actors involved in the drone operations. This session is about how you exactly can do that. Interoperability is the technical way to achieve these objectives. Interoperability is the way that systems communicate with other systems. So we all know that systems have to communicate, but how exactly, when exactly, and what exactly, that exactly is about interoperability. And that's, of course, very delicate, because you know that all the actors have to exchange to achieve the safety levels that you want to have. But at the other side, we also know that we live in a competitive environment where there is also the big data and the cybersecurity issues. The second point of the title is the open source. What is the role of open source in such a safety-driven industry as aviation? An interesting session, and we have also a strong panel to help us to provide some answers to these questions. We have in good company to shed some light. We will not have formal presentations during the sessions. I will ask them questions to the panelists, and they will be able to at least shed some light to the various questions. We have 5 panelists. Let me first turn to Francine Zimmermann. Francine is Head of Policy and Regulation of the Federal Office of Civil Aviation, FOCA, the Swiss aviation regulator. Switzerland has been an early leader demonstrating and implementing use-based infrastructure, services and policies. And by the way, Swiss FOCA wants to introduce the electronic identification early 2021. Welcome, Francine.
Thank you, Koen.
Second, we have Nicola Eertmans of the European Commission. Nicola has years of expertise in Eurocontrol and is now working in the European Commission as the expert on the use-space. He's in charge of getting use-space regulation through with his team through the regulatory process. Good luck with this, Nicola.
Thank you, Koen. Good morning.
Third in the panel is Antoine Martin. Antoine is Program Director at the Direction des Services de la Navigation, or the DSNA aérienne, the French air navigation service provider. And Antoine has been leading the innovative nationwide use-space Together program in France to co-design use-space infrastructure with industry. Antoine will give the French view on the interoperability issues on the basis of numerous practical projects. Bienvenue, Antoine.
Thank you, Koen. Hello, everyone.
Let me now move to the companies, the industry representatives. The first is Bobby Healy. Bobby is the CEO of the promising Iris drone service company. MANA, its manifesto is to completely replace road-based delivery in the coming future. Quite ambitious. Welcome, Bobby.
Thanks, pleasure to be here, Koen.
And the last but not least member of this distinguished panel is Matt Satterley. Matt is the Head of Policy and Government Relations Unit of a company that wants to combine 3 functions: the function of drone manufacturer, the function of drone service provider, and the function of use-space provider, combining the function of Boeing, United Airlines, and the Air Traffic Organization of the AA in a single hand. That is what I call disruption. Ladies and gentlemen, Wing, the sponsor of this panel. Wing is a subsidiary of Alphabet, and Matt will be able to give a wider perspective on the EU-US approaches and the comparison. And final statement, in 2019, Wing was the first drone operator to be certified as air carrier in the United States. Great to join us, that you can join us, Matt. Good.
Thanks, Koen.
Then we can start with the first round of questions, and that we could like to ask our panelists. And I would like to start with focusing on the needs and expectations of the operators, and then later on move to the regulatory side. Let's start with Bobby of Mana. Your company wants to operate firstly on some regions in Ireland. Then Mana may want to expand its operations over the country or over the EU. As operators think about opportunities across Europe, what are, in your view, Bobby, the most important regulatory challenges that come into mind? Bobby.
Thanks, Kuhn. So yeah, we're operating today in Ireland to a town of about 10,000 people, and delivering everything. And when we look at regulations, particularly in Europe, the issues are less technical and less about the definition of the regulations per se, type cert or LUC or any of the standard, what we call standard EASA, frameworks. The way we think about it more as a commercial entity, we must consider commercial pace. And the reason we must consider commercial pace is because this industry is going to need a lot of investment. It's going to need a lot of capital to create the jobs, to create the commercial opportunities there. And without clarity on timeline and certainty around capabilities that the regulatory framework provides, it's difficult for the investment community to look at the drone industry as an investable space. So it's actually not a technical or even a regulatory challenge that I see. In fact, the regulations that they are, and as they're evolving, are quite clear. What's not evolving is a very simple, industry statement that says this is when populations can expect drones at scale to be doing deliveries. And the reason that's important is that if you don't start that debate now, it's going to take a long time. Forget about regulations. Regulations, simply say we're safe and we have systems to work. We need to engage communities. We need to engage the population and the governments around Europe, around the world, that says, look, this is coming, but here's when it's coming. And right now, it feels to the average layperson or the average investor that it's pie in the sky. There isn't enough clarity on when it's going to happen. So actually, the challenge for me is clarity.
Thank you, Bobby. Clarity, interesting. Engage with communities, investable framework, and societal acceptance. Let me turn to Matt. Matt, you know that Wing is operating multiple markets, and you are supporting already in the EU activities in both Switzerland and France. How do you see U-Space and ATM contributing to global operations, and do you see a common U-Space or UTM approach? Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Kuhn, and thanks everyone for being here this morning. With respect to your question, we think that harmonization is essential to aviation. This has been well documented for manned aviation for decades, and we think will be equally as important for the unmanned world as well. Common data exchanges, protocols, approval processes, regulations, and recognition of international standards, all these types of things contribute to that harmonization. And we think that they will help to build the promotion for an unmanned economy that can be powered by UTM or U-Space. There are several efforts underway by global standards development organizations with early efforts to synchronize these regulatory approaches in the European Union as well as in the United States, Australia, and elsewhere. And we think, for instance, remote identification or electronic identification is one of these foundational authorization and authentication elements for unmanned operations in the U-Space. We're also seeing a lot of harmonization movements in our community to build open source electronic identification solutions, like the InterUSS platform, which is hosted by Linux. Open source solutions can leverage best of breed technology solutions and bring benefit to the entire community. We're a partner at the InterUSS platform, as is Swiss FOCA, and we think that will be a huge contribution to the U-Space market, and we're excited for a hopeful kickoff of remote ID services in Switzerland in early 2021. As we look across Europe, we think it's important to understand that unmanned systems are portable and that operators aren't going to be confined to state borders. The use-based regulation takes steps to recognize that member state prerogatives are necessary, but don't necessarily sacrifice the concept of a common European market. To that end, we're particularly pleased by the approach towards certification processes and outlines a path for use-based entities to be recognized Europe-wide. We will continue to advocate for the harmonization of use-based regulations, and I've appreciated the opportunity to work with regulators, air traffic providers, and industry partners, all represented here on this panel today, towards the development of standards that we think will define critical levels of safety and also promote common acceptance of criteria for advanced UAS operations.
Thank you, Matt. Interesting elements as an answer and as a way forward. But you need to have a regulatory framework to work in and to have that clarity on investment perspectives and so on. So that's why I turn to Nicolas, who could give a perspective from the European Commission and the European angle of attack. Nicolas, you heard the expectations of industry. How will the use-based regulation, the draft regulation, help to tackle some of the issues that the previous speakers have addressed? And what are the Commission objectives to contribute to these expectations and issues raised? Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, the objective of the Commission is really to accommodate initial use-based operations and support the scaling up of commercial drone operations while establishing some harmonized principles from the start. We all know that further research is required to address outstanding technological, operational, legal issues before we can envisage a full integration of manned and unmanned aviation in the same airspace. But at the same time, we see various initiatives across Europe pioneering initial use-based operations and delivering concrete operational benefits already today. And as a Commission, we want to accompany this effort with a regulatory framework that is as high level and performance-based as possible, but still ensures a harmonized, safe, secure, fair, and affordable system from the start. And interoperability there is really key. We want to avoid a situation where US operators would be confronted in Europe with a patchwork of diverging and incompatible use-based ecosystems, because we think that the competitiveness of the European operators is at stake here. So that's in a nutshell what we want to achieve with the draft regulatory framework, which is an initial use-based framework, and there will be a need for further evolution at a later stage. It's really to support the scaling up of the drone operations. So we want to remain open, but we want to let the use space grow and evolve, but we want to establish some fundamental principles from the start.
Thank you, Nicolas. That seems promising. Let's now try to complete this European perspective to the national authorities who really retain some discretionary power to implement this European framework. Francine, FOCA has been successfully unlocking the drone technological potential. How do you see the use-based regulation and the national implementation further enable this unmanned and drone sector? Francine.
Thank you, Koen. Thank you for the question, and welcome to everybody also from my side. So yes, as you said, we have daily operation, drone operation in many different type of operations, such as crop spreading, delivering of blood sample, gathering of weather data. And if I look at a global level, the global drone market, the growth has been tremendous in the recent year. But what is missing? What is missing is that we still have no single system how to access the airspace. So the use-based regulation is the missing piece. It's really key. I think it was mentioned by Matt and as well by Nicolas, harmonization. So we will need the use-based regulation will bring harmonization, which is help for scalability. So we knew that it would take time to have the use-based regulation because we need to agree everybody at European level. So we thought, what can we use? How can we use best that time during now and the day when we will have the use-based regulation? So we launched a private-public partnership called SUSI for Swiss Use Space Implementation. And we said, okay, everybody from industry, research, and so on, if you want to also to explore this new technology, just join us, join the effort, and let's try to use that time to test the technology. As a regulator, I know very well that innovation, they are not coming from the public sector, they are coming from the private sector. So we said, industry, look, come together, join effort, and tell us how we can best regulate this new technology. Because what is worse than having no regulation is to have a bad regulation, right? So we really are trying to use that time to learn about the technology, to understand the needs of the different stakeholders, and also to challenge a little bit the assumption that we may have in, let's say, a traditional aviation stakeholder.
Thank you, Francine. Interesting points. Could I ask Antoine now to complete a little bit and give some more insights in the French project? Antoine, you have been driving the Together program in France. Could you give us already some key takeaways, early takeaways on your expertise in France? Antoine.
Thank you, Koen. Yes, first of all, I would like to say that I agree with all the challenges that were highlighted by the previous speakers. There are many, many challenges, and all what was said was really true about the need to have some clear perspectives, to let innovation arise, and to have a harmonized approach within Europe. And I think that the approach by Switzerland, such as the one that Francine has just explained, is the right one. And this is also the approach we have in France. We have an approach which is at the same time iterative, flexible, scalable, and collaborative. Collaboration is really the key, and actually it is the only way. And we need an open collaboration. Why? Because I think that DSNA needs the support from the industry, from multiple actors from the industry, but also other stakeholders. And at the same time, we know that the industry needs our help to integrate the operational real-life environment. What are the lessons learned so far in France? We already have 12 experiments across France launch. We are about to launch a new call this very December in order to provide U-Space-like services all across France at low altitude. And so far, what we learned is that actually U-Space-like solutions do deliver benefits. So it works. It helps the drone operators to do their job. It helps air traffic controllers to do their jobs. It helps authorities to do their job. And we already know that there are quite a few number of solutions that are available today, such as wing solutions, such as other solutions. But there is a but. All those solutions have required an important integration work into the real-life environment. There are a number of issues, technical issues, legal issues to solve before the solution can be implemented. And so it requires work at a local level. But at the same time, what is difficult is not to make the solution too specific at a local level, because interoperability is a key. So we have to find the right balance, and this really needs time, and again, an open approach. That's why we work all together, and also the name of our program is U-Space Together, because we think that we will succeed in implementing U-Space together. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. It's reassuring that France and Swiss are at completely the same wavelength, and they are really reaching out to industry. So I'm coming back to industry. Bobby, you heard the replies from the regulators, how they want to deal with your expectations and further open up your BVLOS operations. Do you think that what you just heard from the regulators, and in particular the future use-based regulation, that is able to foster future growth of your company, Mana? what you think and why do you think so? It will be able to benefit your future operations.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that the key here is that there's a very strong willingness to engage with regulators across Europe. And we, all of our work today is in Ireland with the Irish Aviation Authority, and they're just a super partner. Like, it is a partnership, as I think Nicholas said. It's a partnership between state entities and commercial enterprise to make this happen. And I think that's working very well. I think Europe actually leads in that regard. There's a handful of other markets around the world where, partnerships are moving quickly, but none in such a large cohesive market as Europe, and one that wants to and is harmonizing. So I'm very happy with the level of engagement, and of course I'm a commercial operator, as always pushing boundaries and always wanting to go fast. We have plenty of engagement and are very happy with that. But I do think that there's still a gap. If I speak to the transport minister or the minister for employment in any of the markets in Europe, they don't understand the timeline for when to expect drones fulfilling commercial operations. So while we're doing a great job as an industry, nobody knows about it and nobody knows. So I think where the gap is that regulators and aviation authorities need to engage and do a bit more work on engaging already with government to get government involved as well. And I know government are kind of sponsoring this, but I think that there's a lack of understanding at government level around not the potential of this, but the timeline of when this will happen and the consequent support for industry that would be needed from government.
Thank you, Bobby. Interesting to hear that. The importance of a timeline to give some investment reassurances. Can I come back to Antoine, as the DSNA is a great federator? And how do you see, Antoine, the role of DSNA to leverage U-Space to reach out to a panoply of operators, from drone package delivery to photographers and recreational flyers? What impact do you think that a federated network of U-Space service providers will have on operations, on safety, and on operator awareness?
Okay, interesting question. Actually, I think the first interest of a federated approach is to work with multiple actors. And that's the way we want to leverage innovation, for instance. And that's the way we can find solutions. And that's the only way, I think, we can achieve interoperability, by working all together around the same problems in order to find out what are the appropriate solutions for the industry. So we build the interoperability all together through this federated network of actors. This is one key, I think. So that's the reason why we need a really open approach. I think the second point is that if we want U-Space to work, we need to deliver benefits, value to the final users, the drone operators. We really need that, and that's the key. If we want safety delivered by U-Space, we need U-Space to be used, not misused, really used, and to be properly used. We need to deliver services and information that is tailored to fit the exact business needs. And so we really need a very open approach, so that many kind of actors, of solution providers, can enter the playground and develop and sell their own solutions, so that again the services can be built to fit all the different business needs that we have in the market in Europe. In a nutshell, that's it.
Antoine, very interesting. So you want to focus on the business needs, and I imagine that those businesses will want to move across the different national borders within the European market. So that makes me turn back to Nicola. How will the use-based regulation, the European use-based regulation, address this aspect of European market dimension and crossing national borders? Nicola.
Well, establishing a European market is really at the core of the regulation. Not so much in terms of establishing a common use-based services market. That's of course what we want to do, but it's not an end in itself. Establishing a common use-based services market is a mean to support the free movement of UAS operators across Europe, to support the delivery of UAS services across Europe. And having use-based service providers certified to provide services across Europe and also be able to compete across Europe means that UAS operators themselves will not only have a better chance to get the most value out of their use-based contract, but also potentially the option to operate across Europe with a single use-based subscription. So a bit like today, you have roaming possibilities with your mobile subscription. As a US operator in the future, you could potentially operate everywhere in Europe with a single use-based services contract. In addition, operators that may have the resources to do so would also have the option to be certified as a use-based service providers. So they could actually deliver the use-based services where they need it for themselves. And to implement this framework, we'll need, of course, the support of AMCs and standards, and that's an area where we will need industry involvement and support of the European industry in particular is key in making this happen.
Thank you, Nicola. Interesting reference that you made to telecom and also to the idea of self-handling, whereby you integrate drone operations together with use-based service provider. Interesting. You also refer to the regulations which need standards to be implemented, and I would like to invite Francine. Francine, can you say something on standards in the use and opening up of the Swiss airspace for drones? Francine.
Thank you, Koen. Sure. First, I would like to say that first we need to have the regulation, because the regulation is key to open up the sky. But then standards, they will allow applying the regulation and facilitating the work for industry as well as for authorities. If I can take a very concrete example, take the SORA, the Specific Operational Risk Assessment. So one of the drone operator who is flying in Switzerland since a couple of years, when they came to us with their SORA application, they have to prove to us that their mitigation measure to reduce the effect in case of ground impact, so if the drone is falling from the sky, were effective. So they installed a parachute and they did multiple tests to see how the drone will behave. We also went with them on the terrain to see how it happened and so on. So it was time consuming and also quite costly. But now, a couple of years after, we have a standard. We had an ASTM standards on the parachute. So now the applicant can just say, I comply with the standards. And this is very useful for the industry as well for the authorities. So here, I really see the standards like in parallel to the regulation as accompanying and simplifying the work for everybody.
Thank you, Francine. So we have a kind of process whereby the Commission, the European layer, will adopt performance-based regulations, where industry then comes with standards to make sure that there is a fit between the performance-based regulation and the standards. This brings me back to the proposal on the table on the use-based regulation. I would like to ask this question to Matt. Matt, the current draft foresees a 1-year implementation to implement all the requirements in that regulation. Is that quite ambitious, or is that just sufficient? And what would be your suggestions to the member states who really have to implement this regulation? Matt, what are your views on this?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. You know, one of the themes I've heard from both the regulators and from my colleague Bobby on this panel is that predictability is key for operators. And from the wing perspective, I think that's true. We hear a lot when we approach different communities, when can we expect drone deliveries? And we are working our best to try and give them some sort of expectation about when they might see a drone delivering a package, be it a manned drone or a wing drone. But the implementation of use-based regulations, I think, will help us to be able to communicate to the community when they might see our drones, when they might be able to have some of those things they need delivered to their homes. Use-based services are essential to enabling that, especially for beyond visual line of sight delivery. And we think that the regulation can be implemented quickly. As an industry provider, we always would hope to shorten some of those implementation timelines, but I do think that there are several steps until we get there. Namely, we're looking for member states to set up approval processes and credentialing processes. Perhaps DG Move may consider relaxing some of the certification requirements for use-based services. I'd ask Nicolas about that. But in all, I do think that the European Commission and DG Move have struck a pretty artful balance in this regulation, and we are very supportive of the path forward. As for what member states may consider as they're standing up use space in their own countries, you know, I think digitization and automation of certain airspace information is really key. As a use-based service provider, Wing and our Open Sky platform have approached a number of countries who actually are still trying to figure out what information do operators need, what's important for the unmanned pilot as he considers or she considers entering that airspace. And so finding what the proper information is for the unmanned pilots, making it available to them in a manner that is standardized, that meets certain protocols, and is available in a digestible digital format is really essential. And I think once we get that flow of information, you'll start to see use-based flourish and a drone economy take off.
Thank you, Matt. Very interesting. Then I would like to ask a quite general question to the 5 panelists at the same time. I'd start with Bobby, but Bobby will start, but the views of all the panelists are welcome. The question is, what do operators need from the use space to meet their basic safety and security requirements? So what is the value added, and what is really necessary from use space services to allow safe and secure operations? And then the additional question to this basic question is, what is then the role also of open source solutions to deliver these use-based services? Can I start with Bobby, and then the others can complete Bobby's answers? Bobby, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That's a great question, and it's my favorite question because I'm a strong believer in open source and transparency, and I think that's, you know, what all of us as commercial operators, and to echo what Matt said earlier on about interoperability, transparency, inter-USS, I think the word open source is a statement about transparency, and transparency is essential for trust. And trust is actually underpinning this entire industry. So for me, open source is and standard protocols between operators that we all share, no room for proprietary stacks in any way, speaks very well to trust, which is critical. And then in terms of what we expect from a use-based operator, simply, you know, we're ambivalent. We work with every use-based operator, with any UTM provider. We're an operator, and what we want is predictability and transparency on all of the systems across Europe and the United States together.
Thank you. Interesting views. Who wants to join or complete this view from Bobby?
I'll take a shot. I think, you know, based on what The programs in Switzerland and France, and from what Bobby just said, collaboration really has been key in the unmanned community. I think we've seen industry partners come together to work towards common goals. We're developing open source technologies to be able to lift one another up and to be able to try and make sure that we are safely advancing this technology. And we recognize that it's new and sometimes has some hesitancies from the regulators about how do we approve these technologies, how can they be safely integrated in a manned environment. And we see open source technologies as that collaborative tool that allows us to make sure we're working together as industry. And I've really been quite impressed by the ability for so-called competitors to be able to come together to the table, find common solutions, and try to address some of the initial safety needs that will help us move forward together as a community.
Thank you, Matt. Who else want to add some aspects on these questions? Otherwise, we can turn to some questions from the audience. Or Antoine, do you want to say something on this? Okay, vas-y.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to say that I agree. I think that the key for safety and security is to have trusted information and therefore trusted sources of information. And open source material, is available for that. It is a way to build that trust. It's not the only way, but it is a way. And actually, we do already use open software information in ATM, for instance. Linux, the operating system, is from open source originally. Although, of course, we do not use the kind of Linux everyone uses today, every day. So yes, I think open source can be a way. And again, the key is trusted information, trusted sources of information. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other aspects to be added to this question, then I would like to take some questions from the floor, where we have several questions, a whole list of questions. And the first is one addressed to Antoine, coming from Roger Lee. Regarding your call to provide use-based services all over France, Antoine, does that include uncontrolled airspace?
Yes, absolutely. We currently, our experiments are mainly focused on control airspace, where there is a lot at stake for safety, for instance. But the next call will extend those experiments all across in uncontrolled airspace also, and extend to new services, of course.
De volgende. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take another questions from the floor then, which appears now on the screen. And again, apparently the open source debate raised many questions. Coming from Morten Larsen, will open source technology be best suited for approval in the form of certification or on the SORA? Is this a question for one of the regulators or a SORA specialist? Francine, are you able to answer this question?
Thank you. I will give it a try. Yeah, I think it's a good question. But I mean, in SORA, the beauty of SORA is that we have about 100 authorities worldwide collaborating together with industry. So here, I think this collaborative effort is already there since a couple of years. So, on an additional level on SORA, I don't think we need it. But of course, I mean, we also are member of the Linux Foundation, so we believe in open sources. I think this is the key. But for SORA, I think the effort is a little bit different, because it's really an effort that started a couple of years ago, and all those authorities and industry, they joined effort to achieve like a common risk assessment to approve drone operations. So on the SORA itself, I don't see it really the element of the open sources, but maybe one of my colleagues can add something.
Matt, do you want to add something? I see your face burning.
Hopefully not. But I think that oftentimes the open source implementations are implementations of existing standards. So we've mentioned a few times the InterUSS platform hosted by Linux. Right now, that is an implementation of the ASTM remote ID standard. And that standard may be used as an alternative means of compliance that satisfy conditions laid out in the use-based regulation or help us to gain credit within the SORA. So I think open source technology will be the implementation of those standards that help to drive some of the required safety levels for approvals. But not to put him on the spot, perhaps Nicola might have interesting perspective on that.
Thank you, Matt. Let's take another question. It's about the economic aspects of and financing of these services. The question is addressed to Antoine, but we could broaden it also. What are the financing mechanisms foreseen to provide these use-based services? Can we start with Antoine? Maybe it's referred to into the Together program, but then everybody can say something on the financing of the financing mechanisms. Antoine.
Very, very interesting question. One of the key objectives of our experiments is precisely to experience different business models for use-based service providers and why not for UAS operators. So it's within the scope of our experiment to assess different kinds of business models. And so I assume that different kind of services and fees strategy will be applied by our partners. And we will help them to develop those services, those business strategies, and we will help them to assess them.
Thank you, Antoine. Is there somebody else to quickly add something on this question, or shall I leave you in? We still have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, speaking as a commercial operator, I mean, we'd see use-based services and infrastructure, and you pay to use infrastructure like a trucking company pays to use the roads, and toll roads, a drone company should expect to pay for the service as well. And it's a natural and equitable way to do it.
That's a very clear point. We come to the end of our discussion and of this panel session. And I would like to give you a final, very short, room for a very short final statement. And everybody makes a final statement. And starting with Francine. Francine, what is the statement and the message that you still want to give to the audience? So
I would say let's collaborate all together to achieve global harmonization and to ensure that we have a safe, secure, and fair deployment of use-based. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine. Bobby, what do you want to give as a main message?
Just to repeat, pace, clarity, and engagement with government and population in general outside of our industry.
Matt, what would you like to give?
I appreciate everyone for being able to join us on the panel today, and thank you for your leadership in both in industry and at the regulatory level, and particularly Nicola, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the time you've put into this use-based regulation. Based on our conversation today, I think everyone recognizes that it's going to be great to move us forward, and really appreciate all the work that's been invested into it.
Mm-hmm. Nicola, final word.
Thank you very much for the kind words. I can repeat that we are committed to support the drone community in developing a driving and functional ecosystem. And I would just like to repeat an announcement that was already made earlier this week, is that next year we will launch a new round of discussions and consultations with stakeholders, and we are going to update our drone strategy. So stay tuned. We will consult you on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting message. Much work to do, Nicola. Very ambitious. Thank you. Antoine, last but not least.
I just want to thank you for this opportunity. Thank everyone here. And please, everyone, keep your mind open and please work together, because there is a lot at stakes, such as safety, social acceptance, and of course the economy. So work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, the panelists. It is great that from the whole discussion, we see so many commitment and engagement from so many partners from all over Europe. When we started the drone file many years ago, we were a few, and now we see so many, the enthusiasm of so many people. That is very reassuring. Thank you for attending and listening to the seminar. It was my pleasure to moderate such a high-placed panel with such nice views, interesting views. Thank you to this vision, to this panel discussion, and see you in the next session of the Amsterdam Drone Week. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Let's take a moment to think about the future. Our world 10 years from now. Let's step into a society where commercial drone applications are part of everyday life, where we're propelled into a new era of mobility, and along congestion-free roads regulated by autonomous traffic management systems. Crossing over critical infrastructure that can be safely and accurately inspected and maintained. Into public spaces where vital first aid resources are only ever 2 minutes away. Around a city where there are clear rules on how to use drones, whether to get around or take incredible photos of every trip. Where our community is kept safer by enhanced life-saving capabilities for first responders. Imagine unlocking the future of mobility as a service and getting to your destination safely and on time, every time. Imagine being able to put an end to deforestation by increasing and optimizing the planting of new trees. Now, look around you. That future is today.